give me one shot here on a blue chip stock, believe me, Kevin, the only problem you're gonna have is that you didn't buy more.
Nobody knows if the stock is going to go up, down, sideways, or in circles.
What's going on, NBA draft fans? Your boys are back, the Wolves of Ball Street, your favorite draft analyst's favorite draft analyst. My name is Corey Tulaba, and I am here, as always, with my co-host, Albert Garbage Time Gim, to bring you another edition of the NBA Draft Show on the No Ceilings NBA YouTube channel and podcast feed. Albert, what's up, my dude? How we doing today?
It's another beautiful day. Always beautiful when we get to talk about basketball. I'm excited. We have a really interesting trio. And I say this every time, but this week especially, I feel it just because we're talking about, we don't do a lot of episodes where we're focusing on like straight up a position. And that's kind of what we tried to do. And maybe not a position per se, but like a group of larger guys is what we wanted to talk about. Some bigs.
Yes. Big episode today.
Yeah. And we have a really interesting group of bigs that we're going to be talking about today. So I'm pumped. I think I'm really interested, Corey, to hear your thoughts about these guys. I'm thinking we're going to feel similarly as usual, but yeah, a really interesting group.
For sure. And to start out with that group, we are going to go with Collin Murray-Boyles, who plays at South Carolina. Murray-Boyles is a sophomore, so he is the lone returner in this episode. He's listed at 6'7", 245 on the South Carolina website. Not sure about his wingspan, but I mean, it looks long on tape, and I think, you know, the way that he plays, it shows that his length is effective. So I'd imagine that he measures out really well as far as wingspan. He will be 20.03 years old on draft night. So he's a really young sophomore. Like, he's probably going to be younger than, you know, some freshmen. Like, I think Brandon Miller was 20 on draft night when he was drafted. Justin Edwards last year was 20 on draft night. So he's a very young sophomore, which is definitely part of his appeal as well as a returner, and probably factored into his decision with the feedback that, you know, he got last year. If you know, he was testing it all and trying to, you know, find things out behind the scenes. He averaged 10.4 points per game, 5.7 rebounds per game, 1.8 assists to 1.2 turnovers, 1 steal, 1 block last year, 59.7% field goal percentage, 0% from three, 66.7% free throws. He had a 10.3 BPM as a freshman, 26.6 PER. He started out the season last year with mono, I believe it was. So he had missed, I think it was like 6 or 7 games before he returned. So yeah, he came on the scene a little later than everybody, and, you know, the buzz really didn't start till a little later in the year. I would have drafted him in the top 10 last year if he had come out. He was somebody that I liked at when he was in high school, and I actually had, like, before the college season started, had texted Maxwell about it, and we were talking back and forth about him a little bit, and I thought that he kind of would have needed to shown any semblance of a three-point shot to work his way into the draft conversation, but he was just so productive in so many other areas of the game that he managed to put himself into the draft conversation for, you know, a lot of people, especially on the internet. You know, people who are really deep in the weeds liked him as kind of like a sleeper prospect. So, Albert, what were your initial thoughts about Murray-Boyles last year?
Corey, I think it's really important that you laid out the context of how his freshman season went. Obviously, he didn't even play until December, right? Again, he had a little bit of a late start, as you mentioned. And not only did he have a late start, and like in terms of like a calendar type of thing, like when he started, but it really affected, I think, the early part of his season. If you look at like his game log and you see how his season progressed, not until really like February did things really start to pick up for him. And he started to really get into a rhythm. I think he really started cooking then, and then obviously he had that 31-point game against I think it was Vanderbilt, right? And then the thing that was really encouraging for me going back into his film and looking over his freshman season, not only was it like the progression over his time during his freshman season, but I like that he really peaked at the end of the season, right? During conference play, during, the SEC tournament. I really, really liked how he played and how it was kind of like, as he was gaining more confidence, he's getting more comfortable with the game and then just being more aggressive. And for me, it was even in like the smaller details, Corey, like when you watch him play early on in the season and then go into like the SEC tournament and the NCAA tournament later on, especially in the SEC tournament, there were moments where he'd be on the floor and you would like see him on offense, literally like directing people where to go and yelling at guys if they were in the wrong spots. And I really enjoyed watching his progression over his freshman season and how he really grew into his role and like, his overall play. And so I think my overall thoughts with him is, I mean, obviously the shooting is like pretty much was non-existent last season, but as you said, his impact on the floor, on both ends of the floor, was really, really enticing. And I totally get why you had him so high. And I had him pretty high on my board last year, but he obviously, actually, no, obvious is not the right word, but he's even higher on my board now than he was last season. And so a guy that is really, really interesting, versatile on both ends. And I'm excited to get into the finer details of his game, Corey.
Yeah, he's really interesting. And normally we start these prospect breakdowns with shooting, but I don't think we should start there for him. I think there's a lot to talk about regarding his shooting, but I'd rather start out with the strength. So for me, I think we should start with where he does excel on offense, and I think that is a guy who is playing around the rim as a finisher, and I think that he's got a lot of ways that he can be effective there, right? Just from the percentages, he was 66.2% overall at the rim, 66.4% in the half court, which is great from a freshman. Now, Murray-Boyles is a lefty, which I love. So he's a predominant. That's his strong hand. That's where he finishes a lot. But he showed so many flashes of finishing as an ambidextrous finisher, and whether it's kind of fallaways with the right hand leaning, off balance, or just spinning and finishing with his right hand with a little baby hook. I think he's, really good going both ways. I think he's got soft touch. He's crafty. He can create for himself on the block. He's really good at feeling his man and then spinning off either shoulder, depending on, how the defender is playing him. And then, he's 6'7", and you look at him, he definitely needs to get in better shape, right? Like that's something that I think teams are really going to want to see. And he's definitely, I think so far the leading candidate for, dropped 15 pounds in the offseason in the pre-draft process, and everyone sees a picture of him and they're like, whoa. But he's still, I think, a really good athlete, even with the fact that, he needs to get in better shape. He had 23 dunks. He's quick off his feet, like he's long, he's powerful. He's not afraid to put you on a poster. I think he's going to measure with big hands. Like some of his dunks, it just feels like he's got enough control of the ball that he's like, all right, I'm willing to absorb this and put you on a poster. So, yeah, I think that he's really good around the rim. He grabs offensive rebounds, right? Like, because he's not afraid to put a body on guys. Norin Rad in the chat says Anthony Mason, style player. Love it. Great name. Naming my son Mason. Yep. So very apt comparison. But yeah, I love how, his effectiveness around the rim.
Yeah, Corey, I think the point that you made about his touch is really interesting, because I actually think his touch is unreal. You mentioned the way that he gets downhill. Sometimes he's going so damn fast that it looks like he's going to absolutely just smash the ball off the backboard and go just all over the place. And yet, even when he's moving that quickly with all of his momentum and the size that he has, he's still able to get it up there with feathery touch and it goes in. And in those moments, I'm like, wow, this guy is really damn good at that. I was going to use the word special, but I'm trying to stop myself from using that word too lightly. Yeah. But the thing about him that I really enjoy is, as you mentioned, he's got some vertical pop to him, even though he's not in the best shape possible. Something I was thinking about in my head is, a lot of times when we talk about bigs, like we talk about like their development and we say, like guys take a little bit, bigs take a little bit longer than like guards and wings do at times. And the thing with Collin Murray-Boyles, I actually think his game is really refined for his age, but where he's a little immature, I think, is the body. Corey, he is still a little doughy, and that's something that I think he's going to take maybe a little bit longer than maybe the rest of his game is. Even where a lot of times we get maybe the opposite, where you get a center whose body's chiseled up and he's really athletic and he looks like he's NBA ready, and yet like the finer details of his game are lacking. To give an example to this point is a guy like a Dembona, right? A guy who Dembona was in great physical shape, had the motor, had all these things, but his overall game on the floor was lacking a lot of detail and was pretty raw in a lot of different areas, and why he wasn't super high on our boards. But Collin Murray-Boyles, I think, is the opposite, where his game on the floor, on both ends of the floor, is actually very refined. I think his body just needs to tighten up. And Corey, something that's going to be interesting, he is 6'7", right? Like he is like kind of like a wing heighted player, but obviously his game isn't very wingy. So I think it's going to be interesting to see how NBA execs go about his eval when the time comes. And so obviously his year 2 is going to be really interesting. And I also love everything that you said about his post game, right? Something that I really loved about him, obviously I mentioned like when he's getting downhill, the speed, the power, all that stuff. His footwork is also fantastic. Like he hits some Euro steps when attacking the rim where I was like, good God, for a guy his size to be that fleet of foot going towards the rim, I thought was really interesting as well. And, Corey, we kind of mentioned, right? Like the shooting, we don't want to get too into it. Like we didn't want that to be the first thing that we talk about. But like his face-up game, I think was really interesting too, even with the lack of the jumper, right? Like he's quick. He's got a first step. And then once he's like shoulder to shoulder with you, the power and the weight that he has, like it's hard to, recover and get in front of him again. And then also he's got long ass arms. So if you kind of combine the speed, the quickness, the power, the length, the athleticism that he has, and the fact that he can finish with both hands, a really, really interesting finisher. And then, of course, you mentioned it too, and I just want to reiterate, an absolute monster on the boards. He led his team last season as a freshman in total offensive boards and defensive boards. He lives there, and rebounding is a very valuable skill on the NBA level. And if he's going to do that at 6'7" with his ball skills, and he's got a handle to him, we talked about the burst, all that stuff, shiftiness, the feet, a really interesting prospect, even if, we're kind of starting all this with the foundation that he doesn't really have much of a jump shot to start.
Yeah. And, it's like, you mentioned, like, you wonder how NBA teams are going to evaluate him based on the fact that he is only 6'7", right? And
right.
Even though he does have length, you do wish he was like 6'10". If he was 6'10", we're talking about like maybe a special kind of prospect, right? Like Dirty Dancer in the chat says, I don't get excited about these undersized power forward types. And I think that, is going to be a legitimate criticism of Murray-Boyles, but in a lot of ways, like, he is to me what like we want Kenneth Lofton Jr. to be, like who's this really slick guy who's like way more athletic than he looks. He's quicker than he looks. You wish he was in a little bit better shape, but part of it is that strength helps him achieve the kind of, like athleticism that you want, even if he isn't in peak shape necessarily. And I think that he's just like the best version of that kind of prospect. And it's because he's like a two-way guy and he offers other interesting aspects to his game. But yeah, like he's also a good screener. He makes contact. He can roll. And then like when he rolls, like we could talk about his playmaking. Like he's really good as a short roll player. Like he knows when he should be attacking with downhill momentum and like going to, get a bucket or get to the free throw line. And he knows when he should be making the play and dishing off to his teammate. And when we talk about like his craft in the post, again, you can go to his playmaking. Now we're looking at a guy who he can read the doubles, right? Like he knows when to pass. He has the timing down. He could see the court really well. So I think that like all of the ancillary skills, when we stop talking about even like his scoring, are strong and apparent enough that he does so many interesting things where it's like, okay, he might not be a number 1 or number 2 option necessarily. Yeah. Also, maybe he could be, but like, if he isn't, he still does enough interesting things. And I think the fact that when we eventually do talk about his defense, he is a two-way player. He's not like, remember when tweeners used to be bad? Right? Now it's like if you're a one position player, that's like the new tweener. Like if you're just a 4, like I think he can toggle between different positions, and he plays the 5 offensively a lot of times. Actually, if you have access to Synergy, if you go on Synergy, like his tape from the Nike Skills Academy this offseason is up there, and like he's playing one-on-one with Ivisic. Like he's guarding Ivisic in the post. He's going at him. Like he's the big in that game with all these other high-level prospects. So he can play 4 or 5 offensively. So like if you have a stretch, like him and Chet together, a guy like that, or him and Wemby together, where, okay, well, these guys stretch it out so he can play down low a little bit more often, even if he doesn't end up shooting the ball. Like if he could play with a stretch guy, like he's able to not have to adapt and build, and he can be patient with some of the areas that he's weak at currently. And I think he's a little more malleable than a guy who maybe would only have to play the 4 if he didn't have all these other like ancillary skills. Like I don't like Kenneth Lofton's biggest problem is that he really is a tweener in a bad way now, where he can only play one position. He's the anti-tweener. He doesn't have that versatility. So I think he's got really interesting ancillary skills in his game that I'm interested to see where he could take a leap from that aspect in his sophomore season. And if he does get like, even more stuff run through him, and he could show off even more of the playmaking. And again, he was, a positive assist to turnover ratio, 1.8 to 1.2 last year as a freshman. So he's got a high IQ. And I think that also helps open up his scoring. Like if he can, fake a handoff and take it to the rack, right? Like you can't necessarily always double him because he's going to hit his man. When that double comes, he's gonna make the right play, and so you might have to single coverage him more. So I think it's going to allow him to even open up his scoring even more too.
Corey, I think everything that you're saying, right? I love that we're calling it early, because in my opinion, even if Collin Murray-Boyles has like the best season possible for his outcome or whatever, I think these questions are going to be there about the height, about the size, whatever. And I think the ultimate point, or the conclusion that we're going to get to, I think we're actually going to get there once we talk about his defense. Because once we get to the defense, like there's going to be a lot for us to highlight and to pinpoint, because I think, Corey, you and I feel similarly about him defensively, just from like the little things that you've said, because I feel very strongly about his defense. And I think, but let me pause myself there. But if we get into just the offensive side of it all, right? The fact that he's 6'7", and at this point, we can't say much about his shooting. Obviously, like the 3-point percentage, 0%. And then also, even from the free throw line last year, he did struggle a little bit. He was like 67%, I think, going off the top of my head. Yeah. But I think overall, what he's going to offer offensively is there is a lot of nuance, right? With what you're talking about, as a guy who is early on going to be, kind of relied upon as a screener, as maybe a short roll creator a little bit, with the passing ability that he does have. But I think the point that I'm trying to make here is that his evaluation, right, when we're tackling the question of, is he a little undersized, whatever, I think the conclusion to that will come once we talk about the defensive side of the ball as well. But before we get there, Corey, I did want to ask you, as our shooting guru, to talk a little bit about how you feel about his outlook as a shooter, because as I mentioned before, there were some possessions, right, where he would face up and he took a couple outside jumpers, and I didn't love what I saw. And of course, he does have the feline quickness of a gypsy, which he was able to use to his advantage when he was facing up. But the shooting, there were some not so pretty misses on his film. And so Corey, wanted to give you this opportunity to kind of speak to our listeners out there about how you kind of see the trajectory of his shooting going. And then more importantly, what are some things that you're looking for from him in year 2 as a shooter?
Okay. So to answer that question, I am just looking for him to take them. Yeah. And not like, I don't need to see him take 4 shots a game, but like if he could take in between like 1.5 and 2 threes a game, that would, I think, do it for me. I think the volume, like just getting them up and being confident, is going to be the thing for me that I want to see the most. Because I don't think he's going to be a great shooter right now, but I think he could be adequate. And, he looked more confident shooting at the Nike Skills Academy in the film that I've seen. Yeah. He knocked down a 3. He was taking a couple of mid-range shots, like face up, stuff to open up his game. So I thought that was a good sign. But the form didn't really look much different than it did last season. And he only took 5 threes last year, but he shot 40% on 15 attempts as a high school senior. So like the volume, not very high, but still they did go in. Now, as far as the form goes, right, he shoots a soft, very high arcing ball. I think it looks okay up top, but I think despite like the touch being soft, I think he uses too much palm. And so like that's where his inconsistent misses come from. So like sometimes it'll like clank back rim instead of like consistently missing in the same spot. Because I think when you use too much palm instead of having that ball sit in your fingertips, sometimes the ball can get away from you. It doesn't come off as cleanly. You can't necessarily like shoot it to the spot as easily as you can when you're using more fingertips. So I think he's got to work on that a little bit. But my biggest problem for him is his footwork was pretty sloppy last year as far as the shooting. And I think it mostly came from the confidence, and because he's playing more inside out and he's not always like naturally just spacing. Sometimes when he did shoot it, it was like he had like a retreating momentum and he couldn't like comfortably like 1-2 or like hop into a shot and use that forward momentum. So there were a lot of moving parts that just were working against each other. So like, I don't necessarily know if he's going to be used as a spacer next year, but I do want to see him in opportunities when he is cleanly parked behind the 3-point line and spacing the floor where he can actually step into his shots. Now, so we talked about a former Knick in Anthony Mason right earlier. His game also reminds me of like fun to play with Julius Randle a little bit. Especially young Julius Randle. Now, Julius Randle shot 16.7% on a half attempt in his freshman season at Kentucky. Yep. Shot 70.6% from the free throw line. Now, you can't chart their development the same way as shooters because Julius Randle has actually turned himself into a good 3-point shooter, right? But I don't think that Murray-Boyles' shot is broken. So like, I think he can develop it if he works hard at it. And Randle didn't start shooting threes at volume until his 5th season in the NBA. So it might not be a thing that we see next year, the year after that. It might be a thing that we don't see until 2029, 2028. And he just gets by doing what he does and staying effective and finding a role for himself in the league early on. And then because he's good at what he does, he gets a little bit more freedom on an NBA floor to expand his game where he doesn't need the 3 right away to be effective to get on the floor. I think he does enough things that he can be patient with his shooting development. So I'm optimistic. Maybe there's not a lot of reason to be optimistic, and I'm taking a very long view here, but I think his shot is okay enough, and that even if he doesn't necessarily show it like next year, I would still take a chance if I was an NBA team on him as a shooting prospect in the long term, because I think he'll be able to work it enough that teams will respect it within a few years in the league.
I just want to say, Corey, and this is just like, I was looking around, I was browsing at different guys, and like we do prospect chemistry all the time, thinking about different players. And then when I was looking at his defensive game, it reminded me of little spurts of different dudes. But I was just looking at OG Anunoby and his college stats. I'm not making the comp here. Don't kill me in the comments.
He's more wingy.
He's way more wingy. But I was just looking at even like a guy like OG, right, who's become a very competent corner 3-point shooter. I love the points that you made about Randle, right? And even Randle, like, to his credit, during his time with the Knicks, has really improved as a passer. And I thought we saw the best version of Randle last season before he got hurt. But Anunoby, just want to read these stats to you, okay? His freshman season with Indiana, he shot 44.8% from 3, but that was only on 0.9 attempts per game. Okay. Total, he took 29 of them. He made 13 out of 29. I just want to read this though. From the free throw line, he only took 1.2 per game. He shot 47.6%. Okay, that was his freshman season. Sophomore season at Indiana, he shot 31% from three, but he took a lot more of them. He was at 2.8 per game. He made 0.9 of them. In total, he took 45. Actually, so it's not a lot more. But anyway, he took 45 his sophomore season. He was at 31% free throw line. He's still really low at 56.3% on 3 attempts per game. Now, the reason why I even brought this up, once again, not making the comparison, but Anunoby was a guy who also needed to really work on his jumper, right? But with time, with development, with opportunity, with reps, really developed, And so it's not even a case study. It's just, I was, looking through different guys, and I just noticed, like, man, OG is a guy who the Knicks really rely upon as an outside floor spacer now. And obviously his defensive versatility is what makes him so valuable to the Knicks. But it's important to note that he was an absolutely deplorable shooter in college. And when I look at Murray-Boyles, Corey, I think what you said is really important because it reminded me of our conversation even about Amen Thompson when he was in the OTE. That first season to the second season, we talked about damn, we really need him to take more jumpers from outside. That was a real big point of emphasis with Amen. And ultimately where I landed, and I was the lowest on Amen, I was like, man, yeah, he took more, but I still think the jumper is absolutely broken. And I think I got some hate for it. And truth be told, his jumper's still broken. But I will say, with Murray-Boyles, I agree with you. I think there were some inconsistencies with the footwork, but I also think a big part of it was confidence. There was one possession, I think they were either playing Mississippi State or Arkansas, I can't remember. And also, Corey, I did want to say, there's so much goddamn maroon and dark red in the SEC. Holy shit, Mississippi State, Arkansas, Alabama, South Carolina, Texas A&M, whatever. Sometimes I don't even know what teams I'm watching. But anyway, just watching, there's this one possession where he faced up against his man. I think he was free throw line extended, and he took a jumper, but you could tell he wasn't confident, right? And he hit it really short. He barely grazed the front of the rim. And in that moment, I was like, okay, I don't hate how the jumper looks, but I do hate how afraid you are, or maybe not afraid. Afraid's not the right word, but the lack of confidence, right? And so, like you said, to your point, Corey, I hope in year 2 that, with the work that he's put into it and with the support of the coaching staff, I hope he takes a ton of them. I hope he takes, 3-3-pointers per game. And I don't really care, how many he hits, but I would like for him to put up more volume. And I think that alone would be a very positive sign. So I'm right there with you.
Yeah, I'm excited to see how that plays out. But let's finish up with his defense. So what do you were hinting at it. I want to hear, what you think about his defense, because we haven't, spoken about it behind the scenes or anything.
I cannot wait to see what it looks like in year 2. I've seen some comments in the chat. I don't remember. Maybe it was Dirty Dancer. Somebody was like, "Oh, he's okay on defense." I'm going to respectfully disagree. I think he's a very, very interesting defender, a guy that I am very high on as a defender. I think that, yes, there were some moments where he showed some freshmanitis, right? Whether it was a lack of energy, maybe there was, he was late on a rotation, maybe, he lost his man a little bit, whatever. I don't want to discredit those things, but also I don't want to put too much weight in them. I think it's important to focus on the good with a guy of his age and his physique and all these things. I think he led his team in stocks last season. And this is as a freshman who started the season late and had a slow start to his season, even after the slow start to his season, if that makes sense. I think the size, length, mobility, instincts that he has on the defensive side have me very, very excited about his outlook as an NBA defender. I get more excited thinking about what does this look like with him having an even tighter physique, right? Let's say he loses 15, 20 pounds and he recoups that with strength and muscle. And the fact that he has the mobility that he has, the length that he has, the toughness that he has. There were possessions on defense where you could see him calling things out. You could see him being aggressive. He was an absolute beast on the boards. I loved him on both sides as a rebounder. But overall, I just felt like the ability that he had to transition from guarding bigs to wings to smalls, really, really good, really interesting, very natural, very instinctual. And I walked away thinking, good God, another year of this with an even better physique. I can't even imagine the type of defender that he might become. I'm not saying he's Kawhi. I'm not going to put names out there. And I know I mentioned OG before, so people might be thinking I'm making that comparison. I'm not. I just think he's a very, very intriguing defender that might become a really high level defender one day, is where I landed, Corey.
No, I am right there with you. I think he is freaking awesome on defense.
There it is.
And again, I alluded to it earlier, like he can guard multiple positions, and that includes guarding up as a small ball center. And that's one of the reasons why I think so highly of him, because I don't think that he's going to give up a ton to most fives that he would have to guard. Like, of course, the standard Jokic, Embiid, they're going to be too much for him. He doesn't have the height for that. Sure. But like, even still, he's got a low center of gravity, a strong base, and he's going to bang and be physical and make them work. And then he has the length to at least make things tough, but he has the quickness also to like deal with guys trying to take him off the bounce. One of my favorite possessions of him, right? He was able to navigate a screen when Kwame Evans was the ball handler. Like, he's able to, because he's so strong, take the contact, get around it like a guard, and then he chased from behind and swatted Kwame Evans' shot from behind. This was in, I think, the first round of the tournament.
Yep.
But he's an awesome lateral mover. He gets low in his stance. Like, he uses his length. He's got good hands. His timing on blocks is awesome, and especially in the post. Like, he's able to just like, guys think that they could just like turn their shoulder and get a clean look off, and he'll just send it right back, you know? And like, he had like a steal percentage, I think over 2.5. And I think his block percentage was like 4.8. So, 4.8, if that was like a center, I was like, not very good. And I don't think he's going to be like a high block guy in the league, but I think that he's going to deter shots, whether that is, just guarding a guy on a post that tries to, go up and over him, or whether it is sliding over and rotating. He's really good. Like, when teams got an offensive board, coming over and helping out and like sending that shot there. And then my favorite is in transition, his kind of like chase down feel, where he's kind of like looking at it like a lion hunting its prey, just waiting, like absolutely sent Josh Hubbard's fast break layup. There was another one against Vanderbilt that he just absolutely like demolished on a fast break. Like, I think he does so many awesome things. The advanced stats are awesome there.
Yep.
And it shows on film. So it's not like he's gambling all the time. Like, he's smart positionally. He has all the feel. And I think that two-way ability is why I'm so high on him. Like, to me, he's definitely starting off as a lottery guy. And I think that he can work his way up into like, I want to say it's probably like the 6 range for me right now is what I would see his ceiling as. Cause I don't think the shot is going to be where it would need to be to get guys feeling dangerous about where he can go. But if he continues to take that step as a defender, along with showing that he has like a bigger offensive load, I think that he can get there. But again, like in the Nike Skills Academy, which was last month, I think, maybe a month and a half ago, like he's guarding Avicic on the block. Avicic like 7'3", and he can't move him, and he's trying to shoot over him. Murray-Boyles is contesting him. So like, I really think that he's going to be able to guard up. He's going to be able to guard down. I think he's super versatile as a defender on that end. It's just really effective.
Corey, the only reason why I looked into the Anunoby stuff is because watching Collin Murray-Boyles guard bigs reminded me, and I know you said like he's not going to be able to do it all the time, and I agree with that. But I just want to focus on the fact that when the Knicks played the Sixers in the first round of the playoffs this past season, OG Anunoby did an unbelievable job at making Joel Embiid's life very difficult. And I'm not saying that OG Anunoby shut him down. Obviously, I mean, Embiid had a 50-point game against the Knicks. However, he made his life very, very difficult and did a great job of guarding up. And that's one of the strengths of OG Anunoby's game. And the reason why he is so highly regarded and valued as a defender is because he can guard your point guard all day, all your guards, all your wings, but he can even guard up and make one of the most dominant centers offensive centers in NBA history make his life very, very difficult. And that's why I thought of OG Anunoby when I was thinking about, when I was watching Collin Murray-Boyles, because of exactly what you said, Corey. Going back to the original conversation that we brought up maybe 20, 30 minutes ago, where we're talking about NBA execs will have questions about his size. And the rebuttal to that will be Collin Murray-Boyles is a ridiculously versatile defender who can guard bigs in a very, very effective way that reminded me of an OG Anunoby. I'm not making the comparison, but I am saying it reminded me of him. And why I think the intrigue with him will be the fact that he is so versatile on both ends of the floor that you can forgive the shooting. And who knows about the shooting? Maybe he becomes a solid shooter one day. But at this point in his development, with what you said before about him being a very young sophomore, there's so much reason for you to be high on a player like CMB. Oh, Corey, I think you're muted.
Yeah, I was muted. I think that's a good place to end our Collin Murray-Boyles talk. I think he's awesome. Albert, Dirty Dancer in the chat says, sooner rather than later, the Tui conversation needs to start. We filmed a film sesh with him that's coming out soon, if I don't remember, right? Yeah,
we did.
So we got a film sesh with Tui breaking down his film from last year coming out soon. So that's going to be fun. All right, so now we're going to move on to Khaman Maluach. Who is headed to Duke. He is listed at 7'2", 250 via the Duke website. He measured at Basketball Without Borders at a 7'4.5" wingspan. He's a guy that we got to watch in person at the Nike Hoop Summit. I thought he looked massive, just like gigantic. It was like the first thing that as soon as you stepped in the gym, you were like, this is a giant human being, and it puts into perspective like when certain guys are listed at certain heights. Like he looks gigantic. He's going to be 18.8 years old on draft night, so super young, right? Norn Rad in the chat, upside. So bingo. Yeah, this is an upside guy, and like my impression at Hoop Summit, and because thinking back to last draft cycle, right? Like Chumchi was the mystery box guy, right? And I was really interested to see what he looked like in person at Hoop Summit. And then it was pretty clear to me, in my opinion, from what I watched, that like the upside, the talent, the size, all of that stuff, when you saw him next to Maluach, you were like, oh, this is a completely different tier of prospect.
Yep.
Now I think Maluach, who again is headed to Duke by way of Uganda, came up NBA Academy Africa, Basketball Without Borders. I do think he is going to be a prospect that a lot of people have very hot and cold feelings on, because he is going to be a guy who is such an upside swing. Not to say that he doesn't have day one skills that I think he'll show at Duke, but he's definitely, I think, a little raw for sure. Yeah. But I want to know, what were your impressions of him at the Hoop Summit?
I think very similar, Corey. Like I feel like I'm a pretty tall person in my normal life, but standing next to him, I did not feel of the same species. Like he was huge. Like he was absolutely gigantic. And you said Duke lists him at 250. Yeah, he's every bit that. Like he's not just some like tall, skinny guy. Like he's got mass to him. And with that mass, he also moves pretty damn well. Like Corey, you're even showing some of those clips right there. Like he can move, he can jump, he's athletic, he's gigantic, crazy wingspan. I for me, Corey, like I actually think like it's funny. We just did Collin Murray-Boyles, and we had a lot to talk about with his game. Maluach is, and I don't mean this as a slight against Maluach. It's just there's not as much to talk about with him, and it's has a lot to do with where he is right now in his development. There aren't that many layers to his game. He is gigantic. He is athletic, and that's a lot of what he kind of relies upon on both ends of the floor. But the one thing I will say, and Corey, we're going to get into this part very soon, I think, when we were there at Hoop Summit, I liked the fact that he was putting up jumpers. And I
Mhm.
get it. Like, there are different things that he's got to work on, and he's very raw, blah, blah, blah. I like that he was putting up jumpers from beyond the 3-point line, from the mid range. And I love that, he played for South Sudan. And then in those Olympic qualifier games was like, hey, let me face up on Joel Embiid and take a 20-foot jump shot and nail it.
Yeah.
And then later on in the game, let me stand in the corner and bang a 3-pointer from the corner as Anthony Davis is closing out on me. So those were like kind of my initial thoughts with him, Corey. Like, huge, athletic, good build, good like size to him. And I don't mean like height, like he's got some muscle mass to him.
Yeah.
And then I like the fact that he took some jumpers is kind of where I'm at. And so, Corey, I love what you said, very raw, right? Upside, keyword. But there's a lot to be intrigued with his game. And I think that's just kind of where I'm at right now.
I say raw, but I don't mean he's not going to be productive.
Right.
I just mean like he could be a guy who, when he gets to the NBA, it takes a little bit, but eventually like the payoff could be really high. Or he can come in next year and show like a really defined skill set. Maybe that, that stretch that he had against the US team gives him confidence to just be like, wait, are you kidding me? Like, I just knocked down a jumper against an MVP in the NBA. You think I really care about who's lining up opposite me at North Carolina? Like, that's not going to faze me, right? Like, I just showed out against the best players in the world. So I think that the flashes could be special, but sure, it could be theoretical. Like, when he was shooting drills, the 3-point drill from top of the key at the Hoop Summit, it definitely was like, all right, he's not like knocking down like 7 in a row here. But at the same token, I was like, oh, but it looks fluid. There's no hesitation. And like some of the other bigs, you saw them like going through their shot. It looked like a shot that wouldn't translate to game speed. Mm-hmm. But Maluach's shot looked like it will translate to game speed. Now, he's got some funky misses on his film, and he doesn't have a lot of film, and that's another reason why this part of the pod won't be as long. But when it goes in, it looks good, right? And like, he's not afraid to take them, and I think that's a good thing, because he really is like a potential like rim and threes offensive guy. And then he has like some interesting little like post stuff. Like, he has that like spin over the right shoulder fade away, kind of like that little Joel Embiid on the block move that he showed off at like the Basketball Without Borders. I actually thought he was really good at Basketball Without Borders. Like, obviously he was so much more physically imposing in that setting against a lot of those guys that are his age. So, and he played with really good passers. So that certainly helped him. But he's going to be playing with a lot of good passers and talented guys at Duke too. So I think they'll make his life a little bit easier from that aspect. But yeah, I think he could get there. The shot needs work. I don't think he's going to be like a guy that Duke is going to all of the time. I think he's going to be basically used as like a rim roll, lob threat guy, get out in transition and some pick and pop threes. I don't think he's going to be doing a ton of creating, although I'm sure he will do that little like face up, jab step, 15-footer. There's a lot to like. It's raw, but it's intriguing. And like, he's a massive lob threat. He gets like, because of his reach, he's able to like get up and flush in ways other guys aren't. So yeah. And you know what I like? I like that he hits guys on screens. All of these guys that we're talking about today actually make good contact on screens. And in the Basketball Without Borders, I was really impressed by like how quickly he would like screen, flip his hips, and then recognize that the guard needed a rescreen, set that rescreen, and then like quickly roll to the rim. So like, I think that there is some feel there. So like, the raw skill, but also there's some feel. He had some nice passes in Basketball Without Borders. Like, there was a possession where he short rolled, ended up like closer to the rim than the free throw line, read the guy rotating over as the low man, hit the corner guy, swung the ball to the wing, which was Yakachonis, who drove, and then Maluach was waiting at the rim for the flush alley-oop. So like, I think he's a guy who's going to play well with other players. And I think he's going to be a guy that, does some really, really fun things, this year at Duke.
That last point, Corey, him being at Duke, I think he's really going to benefit from the context that he's in, playing with Cooper Flag and all those guys, and the list. I mean, the talent they have on that roster is incredible this season. Really excited for that. But and also the floor spacing they're going to have with the shooters they have in Nepal and Darren Harris and all those guys. I'm really excited to see what this looks like. Him playing next to Flag and all those shooters and the guards that they have. And there should be a nice little jump from some of their sophomore guys too. Excited to see maybe if Caleb Foster takes another step. Could be fun, right? But overall, like I think Coach Shire is going to put him in a really simplified role. And I think that'll be great for him, because I also think NBA teams are going to be looking to do the same thing with him, and man, I'm excited to see how this goes. And I don't think the Knicks have a pick this year, but imagine if Tibbs got his hands on a guy like Maluach. That could be a lot of fun, right? But overall, Corey, like his scout is way simpler than the other guys we're going to be talking about, even the next guy we're going to be talking about. But that's not to say that we don't think he's going to have a really interesting season with Duke. Like, really excited once again to see him in that context, to see how he thrives in that, and what he's asked to do. And so, yeah, I'm right there with you, man. I think he's a very intriguing prospect, but not because there's like a lot to his game, but more just with how gigantic he is and how he moves for guys that size too.
Yeah, and it's not only like Duke's insane recruiting class. It like their transfer guys are really high level too, along with a guy like Proctor who's returning now as a junior. Like, so they're gonna have a talented team, and he's a kind of guy that honestly he could play 15-20 minutes, have the kind of struggles that a guy like Lively had, and still get drafted in the lottery. Mm-hmm. Because the physical tools you just can't teach it. And the kind of offense flashes that he's shown so far in his young career, you can't teach those, right? At that size, those guys don't grow on trees. So, and then, the defense, like they're going to be ups and downs. Certainly. I think like at Basketball Without Borders, I think he did a much better job of kind of like playing cat and mouse in pick and roll situations when he's in drop than he did necessarily like at Hoop Summit. There were a couple of possessions where he was like guarding Newell and he just was too deep and he couldn't recover out for the threes to a shooter. So I think, he's going to have to do, there's a little honing there for sure. Like another possession at the Hoop Summit, Mo Johnson, who's headed to Illinois, Maluach slid his feet, stayed with him. Johnson put up a layup. Maluach swatted it. Johnson got the offensive rebound. Pump fake. Maluach up in the air, trying to block everything. Draws a foul, right? So like there are going to be things that he's going to have to clean up and learn. And there's going to be an adjustment for sure. But the tools are very intriguing. And so for me, I think there's going to be a team willing to swing, whether he has like a really productive season or not, because tools are what they are. The measurements are what they are. And these guys are not easily attainable.
The last point I'll make, Corey, based off of what you just said, piggyback off of what you just said, Duke, they posted a video, I think it was like a month ago, of them in practice, and Maluach contested and blocked a Cooper Flag jumper. I think Flag got it back, went to the rim, and got blocked at the rim by Maluach again. And so I know it's just a highlight, just a clip. Doesn't mean it doesn't even mean that much. However, if Maluach is going to be show signs of that type of defense, NBA teams are going to be super into that. So we'll leave it at that.
Yeah, agreed. And those are the flashes. Again, these are prospects, right? Like, so you need to buy into flashes on certain guys, and some guys have a little bit more leeway. Maluach is the kind of guy that has a little bit more leeway. So, all right. Last guy that we're going to talk about today is Derik Queen. And I don't think that Derik Queen has gotten enough love within the scouting community on the World Wide Web. Now it's the off season, so, it is what it is. And a lot of guys are, they're going to find film on the guys who are on the boards, and those are the guys you look at. But I think Derik Queen he has the potential to like skyrocket up draft boards. I am a big fan So Queen is listed at 6'10", 246 via the Maryland website. I have heard from a source that he lost 20 pounds this offseason. So hopefully he comes in better shape, because like Murray-Boyles, he definitely had some toning to do based on his high school stuff. I've seen him live a ton, whether through Montverde or I saw him at the Jordan Classic as well. And he's always looked really big. Like, he's always looked like one of the biggest dudes on the court. So Derik Queen is a guy I'm really high on. He is headed to Maryland, and I think that's a good spot for him. He's going to get to play along a guard like Jacoby Gillespie, who I think who could potentially have a breakout season for Maryland in the same way that guard from Colorado, who I'm blanking on right now, KJ Simpson, that KJ Simpson had last year. I think Jacoby Gillespie could have, a similar breakout in like the draft conversation. What did you think of Derik Queen?
So before we started recording today, I was like, hey man, like, and we both agreed Maluach, simpler scout. And so we're like, let's bookend Maluach with some really talented, versatile bigs. And so where I'm at with Queen, my like headline note that I wrote in my notebook, big dude, great feel. Big dude, great feel is where is the foundation of where I'm landing on him. I'll get into some of the stuff right now, and then obviously we'll go from there. But I really love the hands on him with Derik Queen. I think he's got great hands. I think the passing with him is really fun. The fact that he can pass with both hands is insanely fun. Corey, I saw you did a little thread on Derik Queen the other night, and I loved everything that you said. And I love that you highlighted not just the good, but also some of the not so good and the areas of improvement, which I agree wholeheartedly. I think one of the things that I noted here in my notebook that I'm really interested and intrigued to see how the discourse about it goes throughout the season is, I think the discussion around how he moves is going to be really interesting, because I think for me, like, I think he moves really well for where he's at in his physical development. So I'm not saying he's like some elite mover, but I think considering where he's at physically in terms of the Montverde tape, I was like, considering how big this guy is and the fact that he is a little doughy, I love the way that he moves, was my conclusion. And I want to see how certain people talk about it, because I've already seen some things on the internet of like people calling him like slow footed and like not agile. And I was like, I wrote in my notes, I couldn't disagree anymore. Like, yeah, he's a big dude, but considering how big he is, he moves really, really well. So that was one of the main things in my notes that I wrote, that I want to see how people talk about it, because I feel like they might out themselves depending on how they talk about that stuff, was kind of one of my conclusions. Yeah, not a big vertical athlete right now. I get it. But I think the footwork compensates for a lot of that stuff. And on the offensive side of the ball, I think he's got soft touch and good footwork. And so, yeah. And then the nitty gritty stuff, I think he's got a good handle for his size. Like some of the stuff where, the grab and go stuff with him, I thought was really interesting. And I'm going to highlight a couple plays and some moments from the Geico Nationals that I want to talk about later. But let me pump the brakes here, Corey, and just say that my overarching macro stuff with him is that I think he's gigantic. I think he's got great feel, and I think he's extremely versatile on the offensive side of the ball.
Love it. Love everything that you said. I think you're spot on. And I think that the discourse with him could be very similar to what the discourse was with Alperen Şengün, who he measures out very similarly to, at least based on the listed height and weight. He is so skilled. He moves so smoothly. His footwork is he's not fast. I'm not going to say that he's fast. He's not like blowing by dudes. But he's able to like carve guys up when he grabs and goes, because he's like skilled and he knows that he could play like side to side and cross guys up, and he's comfortable using his handle in the open floor. But yeah, like the combination of feel, skill, footwork. Again, I've seen him so many times. Every time I've seen him, now again, this is a guy who's playing with Cooper Flagg. Every time I see him, I'm like, I think this guy's the best player on the floor. Like every time I watch him, he's dominating the competition and easily. It's like they're not force feeding him, and he's just like doing whatever he wants. And I get like post play is not like super in vogue, but like this is a guy who is super good in the post. He's a guy, because he has such good feel and he is such a good passer, he's going to be able to be run at the top of the key, off handoffs. He's good in screen and rolls, right? Like, I actually think there's a little bit of shooting upside for him to unlock. Even though, the 3-point shooting definitely wasn't there in Montverde, and it was a little more comfortable shooting on the Under Armour circuit, but even still, he wasn't shooting threes, a ton of threes. So I just think there's a lot of opportunity for him to just show like the kind of big man skills that big men have. Now, he's not as good of a defensive prospect as Collin Murray-Boyles, right? But he's bigger than Collin Murray-Boyles is, I think. So like, I think he'll get a little bit more leeway. And I actually think he's probably a little underrated defensively. He just doesn't have the motor that a guy like Collin Murray-Boyles has. But when he is actually giving like that kind of effort, and if he did indeed lose 20 pounds because he knows he needs to get in better shape to compete at the highest level, then that's going to help him defensively, because part of it might be conditioning, right? But every time I see him, I just walk away going, damn, this kid is good.
Yeah.
Damn. And if he could pass the way he passes, I mean, look, Albert talked about the thread. I started it off in the middle of the game because what I did is I've been like watching games and clipping from start to finish. But I started off with a clip from like the middle of the game because he made a left-handed live dribble from the left wing, live dribble skip to the opposite corner on a rope on the freaking money.
Yep.
It's just not normal for high school kids to be able to make. And I'm talking about guards, let alone, guys who are playing power forward or center. So that skill and like that playmaking, that's his standout skill. But again, I've seen him abuse dudes in the post, not just with physicality, which he can do, but with skill and footwork and counters. He's got counters for days. He's a strong offensive rebounder, another strong offensive rebounder who creates second chance points, right? Looking at percentages, his finishing, 70.9% at Montverde near the rim, on 223 attempts, 71.8% on the Under Armour circuit on 199 attempts. So incredible volume around the rim, finishing over 70%. That's the soft touch. That's the footwork and skill to just create open looks for himself. That's the second chance points. That's, he's a low down low. He sets good screens. He's crafty. Like he does all of like the traditional old school big man stuff with the modern twist that you need. And I love watching him play. I think he's so fun.
Corey, if I can, wanted to highlight some of the passing because for me, you just mentioned, right, that what a wicked pass. And it was like, not only is it just ridiculous that he attempted it, but also it was, as you said, on a rope, on time, accurate, like special stuff, right? However, the thing that I did want to mention with him was that his passing is so good that teams like were scouting it and were preparing for it. So the game that I wanted to focus on against Columbus, against the Boozers, right, in the Nationals, I thought it was so interesting because if you watch that game, right, there'd be possessions where he's on the left block, right? He's a big dude, right? So the double comes from the baseline, right? And he sees it, right? But the crazy thing is like there'd be possessions where the help would come for the double, but then they would see him kind of turn his head and they would freak out and retreat back. Like it was like we talk about shooting gravity all the time. Queen in high school had passing gravity, and we're talking about a 6'10" big. And I just watching that game and I saw maybe 3 or 4 possessions where they were like retreating because of the threat of the pass. I think spoke such like volumes about his vision and the passing ability. I had to write it down. I was like, this is insane. Like these high school teams are so worried about the pass that they would just rather leave their big on an island with Derik Queen in the post, and he had good post position. And I was like, this is crazy. Like Queen is a very good post player, and yet they were so afraid of the weak side hit that he might make that the help defender was like retreating back. Like they'd come to double and then they would freak out and go back. And I was like, that's special. Another thing that you mentioned, right? The grab and go ability against AZ Compass. I had to write this down. I was like, this is awesome. There were about 3 or 4 possessions where he'd grab the defensive board and he just took it all the way. Took it all the way by himself, either went for a bucket or drew fouls or made the pass. And I was like, and what I wrote in my notes here is like, I don't think he's going to do this a ton, but the fact that he has the handle that he can do that for a guy his size, I was like, look, this might not be vintage Lamar Odom, but this is worthy of note. And I had to write it down. And I was like, this is some really interesting stuff we're seeing from a 6'10" big. And Corey, like you said, the shooting ability is pretty much not there in terms of like 3-point shooting ability right now, right? I'm okay with that. What I do care about was that he was almost an 80% free throw shooter in high school. That I think means something. I think that's valuable. And we talk about it all the time. Bigs that can shoot 80% from the free throw line, dear God, lock those guys up. They are valuable as hell in the NBA. Those are the bigs that you're not worried about staying on the floor because they're 80% free throw shooters. And I thought it really, really important to note that Derik Queen has all of this offensive ability, is a really strong rebounder, right? Great screen setter, and he's going to shoot 80% from the free throw line. Sign me up every day of the week. So I just wanted to throw that in, piggyback off of what you said, and kind of, give some context because he is a really, really special big. Sorry for using that word, but I'm going to say it because I think it's there. And if he can continue to work on that body and continue to tighten up all these, these different abilities that he has on the offensive side of the board, what are we talking about? This is a guy that, Bill Simmons talks about it all the time, right? When you're studying a player, can you see him playing in a conference final? I see him playing in a conference final. That's where my head is at right now, Corey. I think he can be so dynamic and a threat on both ends of the floor that I see him playing in a conference final, even with his lack of vertical athleticism, whatever you want to say.
Yeah, no, I'm right there with you. And, you talk about his grab and go ability to lead the break and this and that. Montverde would very often in their press breaker, put him in the middle of the floor. And the guy you want in the middle of the floor is a guy who can make really good decisions and a guy who can attack, right? Because that's where the break comes from. That's where you want to get the ball. You want that guard, when those doubles come up top in the backcourt, to be able to outlet to the middle, and now you're attacking downhill with numbers at an advantage. And Queen often would be the guy who's placed in the middle because he'd make quick decisions and can hit outlets, or he can take the ball and take dribbles, get to the 3-point line, survey, and make the right play. So, again, here, game I was at, coast to coast, right? Like, he can do all of that. He can make all of the passes. It comes down to the shooting. Now, you mentioned the 78% from the line, big time. He was 72.4% on the Under Armour circuit. So he's consistently shown to be an effective free throw shooter. He was 0 for 3 at Montverde from 3 last year. And 2 of those shots were half court heaves. So he really only took 1 3 in the midst of a game that wasn't the beat a shot clock or something. Right. Now he was only 9 for 39 on jumpers in the AAU Under Armour circuit. But he was much more comfortable shooting those kind of shots in the Under Armour because there's less at stake for him from a win-loss perspective, right? But he would dribble in. It reminded me a lot of the shots that Kevin Garnett would take, where it was mid-range. He'd kind of hit you with the the Hezzy Jimbo. The KD, the crossover Hezzy Jimbo. Yeah. He would bust that out. So he would step into more shots, do a little face up, a little 15-foot mid-range stuff. So we'll see. I think, there's potential for him based on the mechanics, the high release, the soft touch, the free throw shooting. I think there's potential to buy him figuring out the 3-point shooting. I think he has more potential as a shooter than a guy like Collin Murray-Boyles does. I just think it looks cleaner, right? It's just at that point about figuring out the range aspect of it. And I'm somebody who's optimistic about Murray-Boyles. So I think that Derik Queen is going to shoot it. It might not happen next year, but I think he could do it. Now, defensively, again, he's a little inconsistent on that end. Maybe part of it is he's got Newell and Cooper Flagg on the court with him at all times. And Montverde, just the talent level, a lot of times, like he doesn't have to go 100, percent on defense, and they're still up by 15 or 20 points. But I do think he needs to show more consistency, more effort, because he's going to have a harder time in college, from a domination perspective with Maryland. They're not going to steamroll every single team by 20 like Montverde did. So he's going to have to be more engaged, more locked in college. I think he's going to be primarily a drop guy at the next level, right? Like he's not a guy that I think is going to be hard hedging and recovering. But I do think like when he's on the ball in the post, I thought he was really good. I think he's really hard to move because he's a big body. He's got a pretty good standing reach, it looks like. So it's hard to shoot over the top of him. And even on the wing, when he was guarding in isolation, I think he had really good moments against the guys like Cam Boozer and Donnie Freeman. Like Cam Boozer, who, by the way, is like maybe the most impressive high school player I've ever seen live. He like struggled a lot against Derik Queen in isolation. Like Derik Queen was making him work. He hit some tough shots for sure, but because he's got the length and he's able to move a little bit, and Cam Boozer isn't like super quick, he was able to really force him into tough looks. Donnie Freeman, he's a little bit more like he's not as advanced, right? Like he could be a little bit more loose with the ball, but even still, he was making him work. I thought he did really well. Where he had trouble was on a guy like AJ DeBonsa, who's more of like that 3-4, right? Yep. And who's like shiftier and can move more fluidly. DeBonsa was kind of cooking him up last year. But to be fair,
DeBonsa cooks everyone up.
He cooks everybody up. So I'm not going to hold it against Derik Queen for not being the DeBonsa stopper. Now, as a rim protector, he wasn't a super big rim protector at Montverde. But again, he had Cooper Flagg and, Asa Newell there, only averaged 0.6 blocks, but he did average 1.5 on the Under Armour circuit. And I thought that on the Under Armour circuit, he showed a lot of potential coming over from the weak side, kind of hunting guys down and timing blocks. So I think that there is a little bit more potential there than, you might have seen on the Montverde tape. From a rim protection standpoint. So for me, it's just like, look, man, like, can he be a guy who plays hard on both ends of the floor? And if he can, then like, I think that he's going to be a guy who is going to be a top 10 pick. And if not, if he's really bad defensively, then, maybe he returns. But I think he has a potential to be not only a top 10 pick, but I think he has a potential to be a top 5 pick. And that might sound crazy, but I've seen him dominate guys in person too many times for me to go, oh yeah, these other guys, just because they're on a list ahead of him, are definitely going to end up going higher than him in the draft.
Yep. Corey, he's not Collin Murray-Boyles as a defender, right? We compared their shooting, but you compared their shooting before. I think Murray-Boyles is a better defender right now. But at the same time, we talk about like context and circumstance. He's going to be playing in a too big system with Maryland too. And I'm excited to see what that looks like and how he, coexists in that. And I'm excited to see because my thing with him is this, like, I think he's big, clearly. I like his length. I like his feet. I even like his flexibility at times. And so I'm like, well, let's see it, let's see how he develops. He's a young player. Defense is not his marquee skill. But look at how much he offers on the offensive side of the ball, and tell me, like, if he's just decent on defense, that's a win. That's all you really need. Yeah. I'd even take like below decent, below average. I'd be okay too, as long as he's not an eyesore or just like a turnstile. I'm good with that because of what he's going to offer on the offensive side of the ball. But all that to say, like, I also think he might be pretty decent as a defender one day. And especially with us kind of, trajecting upwards of him, like getting in better shape and all that stuff, like, why not? So Corey, I'm right there with you. I think he's got skills and like a foundation where he might become a good defender one day is kind of where my head is at, just because once again, like, I like the size, length, flexibility with him. And so I'm not at like, I don't believe at this point in his development that he's going to be a bad defender is where my head is at. Do I think he's a good defender right now? No, I don't think so. But I think he can eventually become a good one is where I'm at.
Yeah, that's where I'm at too. And I think I've seen good enough flashes in his youth career that, I could see it. Now, look, it's going to be a different speed, a different talent level in that conference. But at the end of the day, like, I think he's going to be ready for it because he's smart. He's clearly like a high field player. And I think that's going to translate to the defensive side of the ball too. But again, man, like if this is the kind of player that you get on offense, and I think like then that's worth it. Right. And I think like these guys who it's like, all right, well, they need to lose a little bit of weight, right? Like, it's not like he needs to drop 45 pounds. Like, he needs to just get in professional basketball player shape. And part of that might just be like, he's still growing into his body. Like, he's a young kid and needs to, like, he could lean out even more just, naturally. But getting committed in the weight room, being a part of that in a college program. And I know that Montverde is like, the top basketball program in, American youth sports, but, continuing on that trajectory, with a big time college program, like, he's got the ability to prove that he can get in really good shape. And if he does that, sky is the limit for him. Cause again, like, the offensive skill, man, really, really high. Really high. And that's without a 3-ball. So when you add in the 3-ball and the potential body transformation, to me, that's the potential you're looking for.
Corey, someone, I want to give proper credit. Gregory Castillo was talking about Sean May. And I'm like, yeah, no, I get it. But he's not Sean May just because he's way bigger than Sean May. And
he's leaner than Sean May.
Exactly. Sean May was not in good shape at all. Like, he really struggled. And we talk about tweeners or whatever. Like, Sean May was an extremely undersized big. So I see it very differently. But all to say, like, to your point, I don't think he's that far away from being in good shape is what it is. Like, if he lost 20 pounds, he might be good, Corey. Like, he might be done. Like, he might be in prime shape for what he needs to be if he really lost 20 pounds. So yeah, I couldn't agree with you more.
And honestly, like, his floor, like, even if he never gets in the best shape, even if the 3-ball doesn't necessarily come, as a big off your bench, right? Like, who's just going to come in and offer a ton offensively in 20 minutes, like, that's still valuable at the next level.
Yeah.
So I think he has untapped potential. I think he already has, like, a pretty decent floor, and because his skill set is so high, that I think he's being underrated. And I think he has the potential to have a really, really, really fun season at Maryland on a bigger stage, because he'll be at the college level.
Totally agree, man. Totally agree.
All right. I think we can wrap the episode up there, right? Like, covered 3 fun bigs, 2 guys who were kind of similar, right? One guy a little bit more raw, but this class is so fun, man. There's so many guys to talk about in this class, and I can't wait until basketball actually starts. I can't
Corey,
wait.
I just want to ask 2 things. Number 1, is it like how? Oh man, do you see a world where all 3 guys go lottery? Is my first question. And my second question, before we were talking about tweeners,
I do see a world.
And like how? Yeah, right.
I could see it.
My other question about tweeners. Before you mentioned, like, we lived in a world where tweeners was like a bad word, right?
Yeah.
We didn't want tweeners. It got me thinking about, like, tweeners in the past. Like, who comes to mind when you think about those tweeners, like, that really failed and, like, did not, work out? Like, my mind went to Tyrese Thomas, but I wanted to kind of give you.
You're bringing up bad memories now, because it was so apparent that you just keep LaMarcus Aldridge in that draft. Like, I was so in on LaMarcus Aldridge, taking him at number, like, that he should have been the first pick, based on his college season. And look, I wasn't scouting the draft at that point. I was, barely watching guys in depth, but, like, it was so clear to me that LaMarcus Aldridge was awesome. And then when Bargnani won that year, right? Like, he's another guy who I guess is kind of like a tweener, right?
Yep.
In that draft. But yeah, like they should have just taken Aldridge. Like Tyrese Thomas is definitely a guy who fell into that because he was too thin to play up,
Yep.
you know, and he wanted to be a wing. So they were trying to make him a wing, actually. Like he was, I got him a 3. And it's like, my guy, you're not. Like, just go try to be poor man's Amari right now. Cause you know, like so that's a really, really good name. I don't know, off the top of my head, I'm blanking on guys, but like in the early 2000s, it felt like there were probably a lot of guys in that big man spot. I mean, similarly, like Stromile Swift to Tyrese Thomas, right? Similar type of game.
Stromile's a good one. Yeah.
Thomas Robinson, Gregory Castillo says, Derek Williams. Yeah, those are good call outs.
Carl Landry.
Yeah. Yeah.
JJ
Harrington.
Clarence Weatherspoon. Okay. I just wanted to ask just because I was thinking about it. I was like, yeah.
But I think now, like, you know, obviously, like, you know, you want guys who can slide between positions because of the versatility. And now it's like, if you only play one position, it's tough. Like even from a guard, if you can only play point guard, right? It's tough to survive because you got to be able to guard multiple spots.
Yeah.
So I think a lot of 2s are suffering from that. Right? Like that 6'3", 6'4", like even if you can go get buckets because of like the lack of defensive versatility, like if you're not also a killer playmaker, people have questions. Like, dude, like Anthony Simons is an insane scorer. But like people have questions about him, right? Like should Anthony Simons come off the bench? Like this dude's capable of putting up 25, 30 points a game a night. But people are questioning because he doesn't have that true like wing size.
Yeah.
You know, so it's hard now in the modern game to just be kind of like a one position guy skill wise, you know, like if you're a point guard who can't play off the ball because there's so many big wing initiators, right? So it's shifted in that way.
One of the last 2 guards of that ilk, Corey, that comes to mind is like Monte Ellis. We don't see a lot of Monte Ellis's anymore.
No.
And he was you're really, really productive and a good NBA player.
Yeah. Monte Ball have it all.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. I just wanted to think a little bit is what it was. Yeah.
All right. Okay. Thank you for watching live, tuning in. Appreciate everybody in the YouTube chat. As always, if you're watching on Twitch, I streamed it on Twitch today. Why not?
Oh, wow.
Thanks for tapping in. Make sure you smash that like button, subscribe, share the No Ceilings channel. That would rock. If you're listening on the No Ceilings podcast feed, we appreciate you. Make sure you give us 5-star rating. That would rock. But, you know, be honest with yourself. You give us whatever rating your heart desires. It's a 5. It's a 5. We'll be back next week. A lot of shows coming down the pipe. You know, we're almost back full time, right? We have a meeting this weekend, the No Ceilings team, to discuss, you know, our plans going forward for next season, which I'm excited about. So that means that we're getting there, man. We're getting very close to the season. So you can follow me at Corey Tulaba on Twitter, at NBA Draft Dude elsewhere. Make sure that you subscribe to NoCeilingsNBA.com. It's free. We also have a premium subscription that you can sign up for, get bonus material, access to our Discord, be a member of the community, which is really fun. And Albert, tell the people where they can find you.
You can always find me at Alberto Gim on Twitter, at GTGNBA on Instagram. And yeah, Corey, I'm really excited for another year of this and what we're doing and the fun stuff we're going to talk about. So lock in, everybody.
Lock in, tap in. We'll be back next week. Until that time, we are out.